Mel Gibson just reignited the Supergirl controversy, and this time, he's going straight after the argument Warner Brothers has been using to defend the movie. As the film continues to deal with the disastrous theatrical run, Gibson is questioning whether Hollywood has completely lost sight of what makes a character worth looking up to, and his comments about Kara Zor-El, the movie's messaging, and the decision to blame the backlash on sexism are creating a much bigger conversation about what actually went wrong. Before we get into everything Gibson said and why his criticism is getting attention, make sure you subscribe to the WokeWatch, because we're going to keep following the latest developments surrounding Supergirl and the future of DC. The fallout surrounding Supergirl continues, and at this point, the debate isn't just about the box office anymore. We've seen people connected to DC Studios and Warner Brothers defend the movie from nearly every possible angle. We've heard arguments about online negativity, fandom culture, sexism, misogyny, and the supposed backlash against female-led superhero movies. But there's another side to this conversation that Hollywood doesn't always seem interested in discussing. Some actors and filmmakers are willing to look at the movie itself and ask a much simpler question. Was the story actually good? And one of the people now raising that question is Mel Gibson. Gibson has become one of the more outspoken Hollywood figures when it comes to criticizing what he believes is a growing disconnect between the entertainment industry and ordinary audiences. His latest comments about Supergirl follow the movie's extremely disappointing theatrical performance and come as attention begins shifting toward its home release and eventual streaming future. The film is expected to receive another wave of scrutiny once it reaches streaming, with reports pointing toward a late summer or early fall window. But Gibson isn't waiting for that. He's already making his position very clear. According to Gibson, he recently encountered a situation that made him question exactly what Hollywood considers a positive role model for younger audiences. He described visiting a major producer's home and seeing the producer's children watching Supergirl. Gibson said that after seeing portions of the film, particularly Kara's reckless behavior and drinking, he couldn't understand why this was being presented as an example of an empowering female character, and that observation led him to a much broader criticism of Hollywood. His argument is essentially this: if studios want audiences to connect with the hero, the character still needs qualities that people can genuinely admire. Gibson also referenced his own past struggles with alcohol and said that because of those experiences, he would be particularly uncomfortable presenting that kind of behavior as something young viewers should look up to. That's where his criticism becomes especially important. The people behind Supergirl have repeatedly emphasized Kara Zor-El as a powerful and positive representation of women and girls. But Gibson believes the character's behavior in the movie doesn't match that description, and he's not alone in making that argument. A major part of the controversy surrounding Supergirl has been the disconnect between how the studio describes Kara and how audiences actually perceive her after watching the film. If a character is supposed to be inspirational, viewers naturally expect to see some kind of journey that makes them worth rooting for. Instead, critics have argued that Kara spends too much of the movie behaving recklessly, making questionable decisions, and embracing a lifestyle that doesn't exactly resemble the traditional heroic image associated with Supergirl. That brings us to Gibson's strongest criticism. He completely rejected the idea that the film's box office problems can simply be explained by misogyny or sexism. In his view, that's avoiding the real issue. Moviegoers don't necessarily reject a film because its lead character is a woman. They reject movies when they don't connect with the story, the characters, or the overall experience. And history gives us plenty of examples. Female-led movies have succeeded at the box office when audiences were given compelling characters and stories they wanted to see. One obvious example from the superhero genre is Wonder Woman, which became a major success in 2017 with Gal Gadot in the lead role. That movie demonstrated something important. A female superhero doesn't automatically create a box office problem. If audiences connect with the character and believe in the story, they'll show up. That's why Gibson argues that blaming sexism for Supergirl's performance doesn't answer the bigger question. Why did audiences who were perfectly willing to support other female-led superhero projects decide not to support this one? For Gibson, the answer comes down to the material itself. He described the movie as an example of what he sees as Hollywood's growing creative problems. Stories that are being pushed forward even when the underlying writing isn't strong enough to connect with ordinary moviegoers. And this is where his criticism intersects with a much larger issue facing Warner Brothers and DC Studios. Studios can't simply tell audiences that they're wrong for disliking something. At some point, they have to listen to the audience and determine why people didn't connect with it. If viewers complain about the script, that's a creative problem. If they complain about character development, that's a writing problem. If they say the protagonist doesn't behave like the hero they expected, that's a characterization problem. And none of those criticisms automatically become misogyny simply because the protagonist happens to be a woman. That's the central argument Gibson is making. He believes Hollywood has become too quick to use political or cultural explanations for commercial failures instead of examining whether the movie itself actually delivered what audiences wanted. And that criticism becomes even more interesting when you look at the history of female-led blockbusters. There have been plenty of successful movies centered around women, including superhero films. The audience has already demonstrated that they're willing to support those stories. The real question is whether the studio gives them a reason to care. That's why Wonder Woman remains such an important comparison. Gal Gadot's character was allowed to be heroic, vulnerable, powerful, flawed, and inspiring all at once. The movie gave audiences an emotional journey they could actually invest in. And regardless of what anyone thinks about the current DC leadership, that film remains proof that a female superhero movie can absolutely become a major theatrical event. So when Supergirl struggles and the response immediately becomes a discussion about sexism, critics understandably push back. Because if the same audience supported other female-led superhero films, then the explanation can't simply be that audiences suddenly became hostile toward female heroes. There has to be something else happening. And according to Gibson, that something is the quality of the movie itself. He also took aim at the broader culture surrounding Hollywood, arguing that studios need to become more connected to what ordinary moviegoers actually want. People spend their money to be entertained. They want compelling characters. They want memorable stories. They want something they can take away from the theater. And most importantly, they want to feel like their money was well spent. If a movie doesn't provide that experience, no marketing campaign or public statement is going to completely change the audience's reaction. That's ultimately why the Supergirl situation could become much bigger than one failed superhero movie. The real question is whether Warner Brothers and DC Studios will actually learn from what happened, or simply continue defending the decisions that led them here. And now that Supergirl has moved beyond its theatrical run and is heading toward digital and eventually streaming, we'll finally get another opportunity to see whether the studio's confidence was justified. If streaming audiences embrace the movie, James Gunn's argument could gain some credibility, but if the film struggles there as well, then the conversation becomes much harder to dismiss. Because at that point, it wouldn't simply be a theatrical problem. It would suggest that audiences genuinely weren't interested in the movie itself, and that is exactly why Mel Gibson's criticism has struck such a nerve. He's not arguing that female superheroes can't succeed. He's arguing that being a female superhero isn't enough to make a character compelling. The writing still matters. The story still matters. The character still matters. And most importantly, the audience still gets the final vote. So now the question is whether Warner Brothers will actually listen to that vote or continue blaming everything except the movie itself. The studio now has a choice. It can treat the backlash as useful feedback and take a closer look at the writing, the tone, and the way Kara was presented, or it can continue insisting that the audience simply failed to understand the film. But if Warner Brothers wants the DC universe to regain trust, it may need to prove that it is willing to hear criticism without immediately dismissing it. The future of Supergirl could also depend on what happens next. If the character appears in future DC projects, the filmmakers will have an opportunity to reshape Kara into a more focused, inspiring, and emotionally grounded hero. That could give the character a second chance, but only if the studio understands why so many viewers felt disconnected from this version in the first place. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you agree with Mel Gibson's criticism of Supergirl? Especially his argument that the movie's problems had more to do with its story and characterization than sexism. Or do you think the backlash against the film has been exaggerated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, drop a like and subscribe to the WokeWatch for more updates on Supergirl, DC Studios, Warner Brothers, and the future of the DC Universe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.